son, where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, we're here again. Once more, it's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast, and we have a multi-returning guest, one of the oldest guests and supporters of this show, Mr. Dakota McCormick.
What's good, my boy? I think this is number 4 now.
I think so, yeah, because we did the first one remote, and then the other two were in person.
Live in studio in person.
Yeah, which I recently did some simple upgrades here, so we'll be in a better position the next time we do that.
Looking forward to that, dude.
Dude, I want to immediately jump into the that you have been doing, because not only, I remember you talking about starting your podcast, Slip and Weave. Shout out Slip and Weave. See it on the back in this killer background you have. And it's been like a pretty cool evolution to watch it go from just this thing you were doing to now doing like legitimate documentaries with the biggest names. And I just want you to kind of briefly summarize what you've done in like the past year or two, primarily with the documentaries.
Yeah. So, in addition to doing what I'm doing with the Slip and Weave podcast, I'm also a part of ITR Boxing. And I also co-host the Lukey Boxing Show, so you can check all those things out. But at ITR, we have a series called the Fight Life that goes back kind of even before I was with ITR. And one of the first people when we sort of rebooted that series, one of the first people I wanted to work with was this woman you see in the background, Shadeja Green. And so through meeting in 2023, we were able to shoot 2 different episodes of The Fight Life, which the full versions are actually on OFTV. They're not up on YouTube.
Gotcha.
But so we did those 2 episodes, and in the build-up, in that year, Shadeja actually got like a title fight signed. Yeah, here we go. You're looking at it right now, my boy. So this is the Fight Life series. So by the time we're done shooting the second one, she was scheduled for her first title fight, and she ultimately wound up losing that fight. And so I didn't see her for a little bit, and then she started getting more active again. She picked up a couple wins, and then most recently on the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson undercard, she won her first world title. And so we're actually in the process right now of shooting our 3rd episode together, kind of with her as the champion. And, the Fight Life, it's really like people see what they see on TV, but we want to see what the fighters have to see in the gym every day and kind of take you into that world, because that's really what boxing is, even though the business of boxing is about spectacle. At the end of the day, it's people in a sweaty gym working really hard. And so we try to just show that in as real a way as possible with the series.
It's really interesting to me, because it's always that way. Like people see an artist, a band, they blow up overnight. It's like, no, dude, that person was grinding. That person was in a dimly lit room grinding. And that's really the same with anything, especially at the pro level. Like we're so bedazzled by the spectacle of it that I think a lot of people just kind of overlook the fact that a whole lot of other shit has to happen.
Yeah, and I think like when me and Shadeja met, it was one of those like real recognize a real thing. Like I saw her fight, and I knew when I was watching her for the first, because I was doing live like in-person coverage, and she was on a Amanda Serrano undercard, and I just knew I was seeing something different. And I think she had, to some extent, was lacking that recognition, and so was I, kind of like as a boxing journalist and someone doing coverage. And so it's been a really cool relationship. After she won the title, she got the key to the city of Patterson, and I got to go to that. Like it was like it was a very cool moment, and to see her progress and to be able to be at least like a part of documenting that and showing people that, it's been really cool, dude.
Dude, I mean, you called it. You were talking about her well before I started seeing clips of her in my timeline.
Right.
Like this is just, one of the advantages of being like ear to the railroad, and just kind of, I don't know, it's the whole purpose of the show.
And you know what? And my guest list on the Slip and Weave podcast, there's a ton of fighters that have been on my show that maybe weren't that big a deal that you will see on an ESPN card the next time you put it on. Or you will see on DAZN the next time you throw on a fight card. They may not be the main event, but they're televised fighters. And so I'd like to think that, I have an eye for what a future, at least athletic star is going to look like. That doesn't always translate to a commercial star, but an athletic star at least.
No, definitely. Like you definitely have an eye for that. And again, it's just one of those things. You just started doing this. This is something you were passionate about. You were always doing it anyways, and you just decided to like get a little more organized. And it's like been really cool to watch. You actually,
Thanks, bro.
like you in some way, you're feeding the higher levels of media. You're finding out this before they are. You're seeing it before they are. Most of that, again, like they're more concerned about the spectacle, but there's so much more to that. It's
I mean, there's been
it's
relatively big fights that like I was the first one to break the story or whatever, and then 300 people see it, and then people forget that you're the one that broke it because But at the end of the day, I know that the fighters know that, and I think that people enjoy our coverage at ITR because they know they're almost getting like the body cam footage. We're there, we're in person, we're showing you what the game really looks like.
Yeah, it's been so cool to watch that. So what exciting things are you trying to do and involve that? Like what are your guys' like long-term vision for that now that you actually like there's some incentive here, there's some traction, the right people are paying attention. How do you want to grow and evolve it?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like the goal as an independent artist or independent anything is to be sustainable. And I think that at least for me personally, that's my goal, is to be able to have a sustainable boxing career. And I think at ITR, at least at the moment, we're providing a type of coverage that doesn't entirely exist in this very like me reactionary internet culture. You know what I mean? And so I just think like if you're a real fight head, you're going to like what we do. Ultimately, I'd like to be able to tell this type of story with more fighters and have a better budget to do it. If I'm dreaming big, like those are all the things. I want to be able to grow and expand it and really give more fighters this kind of attention that I've been able to give Shadeja. And, because there's so many, and she's a perfect example, right? Just people told her no and didn't pay attention for so many years that it was like even a couple of years ago, by the time I got there, she's like, yeah, where the f you been? Not literally, but like,
I've been doing this. I've been out
she's
here
15, 20 years deep into the grind. And it's like, oh, now everybody's just finding out. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that we want to be able to tell that story and give that kind of coverage to as many fighters as possible beyond just weigh-ins and Twitter beefs.
Those are fun though.
Yeah, sure.
Twitter beefs are really fun.
Yeah. But in American boxing, a lot of times that sort of replaces the actual fight, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk about spectacle. Logan and God damn it.
Jake Paul and Mike Tyson.
There we go. Yeah.
There's two of the Pauls. It gets a little
and now
confusing.
they're supposed to fight, right? They have a fight that they're gonna box each other.
I don't know. I hear it's it's a reality show of some kind that they're
of course
versing each other. I can't imagine that they're gonna fight, but I know that if they did, that a lot of people would watch. A lot of people would watch that. A lot more people would watch that than they'll watch David Benavidez and David Morrell tonight, which is a tremendous fight. That even I would say casual fight fans know about, but won't attract the type of attention that Jake Paul versus 50-year-old Mike Tyson will.
Yeah.
Because at its core, boxing is still, again, it's like a sport of spectacle. And so just because, it's the actual number one and number two guys in a weight class, if that's not connecting to people outside of boxing is unfortunately just a little more insular than football and basketball because it's international.
Sure.
And it gets way more attention in other places than it does here.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think most Americans are like hilariously unaware of other sports that are big outside of this country. I mean, even F1, like when I started to get into F1, I was like, Jesus Christ, everyone else is into this. Why doesn't America really care that much?
Soccer is a perfect example.
Yeah,
like we have a soccer fan base, but of course it's much more passionate. You know, when I watch a
like
British
the culture elsewhere,
when I watch a British fight card, it's like everybody knows their boxing, bro. Like it's like their football, and it's like their football, it's their baseball. Where, you know, and it doesn't have that same place in American culture at the moment. But it's not because we're lacking in talent. We have plenty of talent.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, even in the UK and Ireland, and I know like bare knuckle boxing, that's huge.
Yeah,
underground like that.
Another one of those. Shout out my guy Harry Gigliotti, who was somebody who was on my show a bunch of times. Who's actually now, I believe, he's the welterweight bare knuckle champion at the moment. Harry Gigliotti's a real character. That one.
I love that last name, Gigliotti.
Yeah, had some real great long couple-hour interviews with my man Harry. So if you're ever looking for some real boxing talk, this is him, and he's a bare knuckle world champion now.
Hell yeah!
He was one of those guys that switched over from regular boxing, where, you know, he could get certain kinds of fights and certain kinds of opportunities, but in a newer emerging sport where it's a lot of MMA guys coming in, he's been able to use, you know, his skill set and his technique to really, you know, shove his way out to the front. So shout out to Harry.
Yes, that's super interesting. We have to get into a little bit of Tyson and Paul, because I watched that fight just like many people did. And first of all, Netflix sucks at streaming. That was hilarious watching that, like the dropouts and everyone being like super pissed about that. But correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding was the deal that they made was the more rounds they go, the more money they get. Right? Or the more rounds Tyson went, the more rounds or the more money he got.
My understanding was that their purses were fixed at a certain amount. It was ultimately determined, you know, where they were trying to figure out, is this going to be an exhibition or is it going to be a fight that actually goes on their record?
Yeah.
And they wound up actually counting the fight, which sort of changes the rules about how you can do it. In an exhibition, maybe you can do something fun and creative, like, you know, pay more per round, but in a real pro fight, kind of limits how you can do that. I don't know how I felt about it being a real pro fight, you know, but I think that was part of the marketing of it, is that this is not, you know, they're not around, but it was what it was. And, you know, I was updating the rankings for ITR Boxing, and even me, I'm looking at the rankings on all the championship organizations, and there's a lot of names on there that I don't know. But what I do know is that those guys can probably beat a 58-year-old man.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, I knew in some ways it was good for the sport because it's reminding people that boxing still exists, but I'm not seeing how that crosses over to other big fights in the boxing world. I don't see the Jake Paul fans necessarily showing up to watch Usyk versus Fury or Benavidez versus Morrell. You know, maybe they show up for Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney because Ryan Garcia is such an internet personality in his own right, but he is a real fighter. But by and large, I'm not seeing that crossover. I don't see them, you know, discovering the love for the sport through that fight and then, coming over to the real thing. So if that crossover maybe was a little bigger, I might feel more supportive of it. But largely what it does is I think it makes the sport look kind of goofy. And, you know, I think it makes a lot of people not necessarily want to come back because they're like, well, what the fuck was that? Well, it was a 26, 28-year-old guy kind of staying behind a jab and making sure he didn't get knocked out, and a 58-year-old man trying not to pass out. Yeah. So it was just like, and I could have told you that's what it was, and I was saying that for months, but a lot of it, not for nothing, it's a lot of kind of ignorant MMA fans who think that's in some way that there's crossover, like to how their knowledge, like I'm not out here telling people that Floyd Mayweather is going to beat somebody in jiu-jitsu, bro. Like I'm just not.
Yeah. It's
just two different things. So I think that there was a lot of like, oh, he's no way that YouTuber is going to beat Mike Tyson. And it's just like, but that's not the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, dude, watching it, I couldn't help but think this is all for the memes. This is all for the memes. Just how it was presented, the spectacle, and again, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. I'm not saying they didn't fight or that it was fixed or something, but it just did not seem like I couldn't take it seriously.
No, it was just a low risk fight. They both fought a low risk fight. I just think Mike is old and he can't pull the trigger, and people are like, "Oh, why isn't he knocking this kid out?" Well, you have to like be able to throw punches to knock the kid out, and he just doesn't have it.
Yeah,
you know, and he's trying also, I think, fighting his own demons, trying not to get hurt himself. You know, I thought he looked fucking terrified when he was walking in, and aside from that fight, it was a great night of fights. You know, Shadeja wins a world title. Abel Ramos and Mario Barrios had an all-time classic. Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor rematched and had an all-time classic. There was like great things for real boxing that happened that night, but this is what, you know, kind of gathers all the attention as this meme fight. And sure, that brings the dollars to the table and that gets the fighters paid. But in my mind, it's a net negative. There's pros and cons to everything, but it's a net negative to me.
Yeah. Goofy is a great word.
I think it's kind of goofy, bro.
A great word to describe that whole scenario.
It's just a little goofy. And, you know, I know that I'm not disputing that Jake Paul works hard in the gym. I don't even necessarily think he's the full problem. It's just that there's more of a market there for him to fight an old man than for the two greatest female fighters of their generation having a rematch for multiple world titles.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, well, that's we are the society of the spectacle. That is for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they got tens of millions of people to watch it. And I'm really happy that, you know, my friend and a bunch of other really talented fighters maybe got some of the benefit of that. So at least we got that.
Is there ever a piece of you that, like, when I look at the things that I like, there's a piece of me that hopes that it doesn't become mass appeal? You know, is there like like, I understand wanting to have more people aware of the sport and like truly giving a shit and supporting it. But then there's also the argument, at least from my perspective, where it's like, but this is what happens when we bring the masses in. This is how pathetic the masses are. They need this as the thing to capture their attention because they're so inundated with so much other dumb shit. I don't know. There's just a piece of me that's like, man, I wish this would just remain underground. Please don't like it, everybody. Like, leave it for a niche because it's not that I don't want to see any of those things grow or flourish into something bigger, but like, this is just like the inevitable course of, you know, bringing this sport to this generation.
Sure. You know? Yeah, I think I guess what I hope is that the fan base in America at least can grow just enough to kind of give some of the talent that we have here a little more support, especially in the amateur program. You know, like the Olympics at one time were a really big deal in America, and we don't really get medals like that anymore. We got one bronze medal this year. Shout out to Amari Jones. But you know, we're not medaling like that. It's a lot of the Eastern European countries. It's Cuba. It's other places that are giving a little bit more support to their amateur program, both just in terms of the fan base, financially. There's more systems in place for amateur boxers to develop in other parts of the world that value the sport in the same way that they value in the same way that we value football and basketball and baseball. Those things that are kind of exclusively ours at the highest level. That's not the case in boxing. We have plenty of competition, you know, and there's 10 other countries that at any given moment could sweep an Olympics. So I guess I just hope that for the younger talent that comes up, that they're able to get some of that same support from the public that people like Sugar Ray Leonard and Oscar De La Hoya and some of the more our homegrown champions at one time who were the best of the best. You know, I hope that our guys now can get some of that love. I think that's what I hope.
Well, I mean, and, build the world that you want to see. That's kind of what you're doing. Like you are deliberately going to the people who are not getting the coverage that absolutely need the coverage and documenting it in the purest way possible. Like without sans all spectacle, just raw. Like, what is this fighter? What are they about? What is their motivation? What are their tics? Like, I don't know. Like you're doing like the groundwork documentation that a lot of people, I feel, just even that everyone has phones and social media and some kind of like digital history, a lot of this stuff would just get lost. Again, going back to the spectacle portion, it's like you look at a fighter's Instagram feed, it's not going to be all the hard shit. There'll be some hard shit, but it's going to be most of the highlights, because that's what all the social shit is. It's our highlight reel. We're not very few people are posting like the true reality of their inner thoughts, and a motive, or their emotional motivations. But, I don't know. When I get into something, when I want to learn about something, I don't want to hear the fucking, I want to hear the raw shit. I want to hear the unfavorable opinion. I want to hear like the dark things that go through whoever's mind in the process of achieving some kind of greatness. That's the cool stuff to me. I don't know. So I see what you're,
and that requires a certain level of investment, right? When it comes to the promoters and the powers that be in the sport, it requires a little more investment on their part to really document some of that. Yeah. And I think part of what we're trying to do at ITR is it's like, I'm showing up Dolo with a $500 camera and I'm going to make this happen. And shame on the rest of you for not fucking doing it with all that money you got. That at least that's some of what I think we do.
No, dude, for sure. And like, bro, that spite, that's some great motivation right there. Like, honestly, you own the footage. Nobody else wants to document it. Even better. Because I will put my name on this, like I will stamp this. So at some point in the future, when we look back at who this fighter became, we understand where they came. Like we actually have a snapshot of where they came from. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the more, in my era of boxing as a teenager and as a kid, and, HBO and Showtime did such great inside coverage on the camps. And so even as a non-boxing person, you could get this look inside and really get attached to the person, get attached to the family, get attached to something in that buildup. And that's lacking at the moment. And I think that, the fight world is really hyper online, like a lot of other communities, right, of all different kinds. I think the fight world is very online. It's clips, it's quick knockouts, it's training clips, but you're not really getting, you're not making a real connection with the fighter. And I think that hopefully we can help new fans and current fans do that.
Yeah, dude, it's fucking sick. And I just love watching it come together. And again, it's like part of the fuel that inspired me to start doing my shit. So I don't know. I just love brute force creation. Like there's so many times in my life where I didn't necessarily have the time or money to commit what I did to a creative project, but like just brute forcing it, figuring out a way to make this shit happen.
It goes back to what you asked me before. What do I want to do with it? It's like, I would love to make one of these the way I'd actually like to make it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that brute force thing you're talking about. Like if I made a list of all the things I didn't get to do, or the things that I didn't like about this or this and that, I could just not do it.
Yeah,
I could let all that shit kind of get in the way. But at a certain point, at least for me and for us as an outlet, it's like, I just got to throw my elbows around and kind of get in where I can fit in and see what happens. And a lot of times the fighters are dying for that kind of recognition.
Of course. I mean, especially after being ignored for fucking years doing it.
Ignored or used for clickbait, kind of one or the other.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just so funny how you go from somebody who's just interested in this thing to like being part of the press.
Yeah, not a pivot I ever expected.
It's just really hilarious. But again, it's using your skills, and it's like it's probably for a similar reason why you got into event production. Same for me. Like I was interested in the music business. I was interested in live music, and is a way to make money, and you see how the sausage is made, and those, in my opinion, are where the interesting stories are. It's not in whatever makes it to the mass form of consumption. It's the tastier sausages and what's going on behind the scenes. You know?
We have a career of seeing how the sausage is made, dude. Like, it's hard for me to show up to a concert and not think about how they made their sausage.
Yeah, no, really.
You know,
I've definitely experienced that too. Even at like shows that I really want to be at, that I want to see the band or I want to hear the artist. I'm like, oh damn, that's an intense light rig they have.
Yeah.
How are they motorizing those LED monitors?
Dude,
you know what I mean?
It's tough. It's hard not to.
It's hilarious. But again, like those are where the interesting stories are. And it goes back to like even music shit. Like I wanted to read the liner notes, but I wanted to also hear what they were actually experiencing. Like all the interesting stories behind my albums are more interesting. All the interesting stories behind my favorite albums are all more interesting than the album itself.
Right. Yeah. The context behind it for sure.
But, you know, this is going to be a brutal pivot. You know, behind the scenes is fun and all. You can be behind the scenes in many good scenarios, but as Dakota and I both know, you can also be in behind the scenes scenarios. They're fucking chaotic. And they're usually chaotic because of shit people. And in the entertainment business, whatever branch you find yourself in, there's a lot of shit people.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest allegedly shit people that exists out there right now would be Mr. Diddy. Now, Diddy is in MDC, which is the detention center in Brooklyn. He is locked up. He's currently facing charges. And the last time Dakota was on the show, a lot of this shit had just kind of happened. And since then, there's been so many goddamn developments. The first thing I want to say before we get into any of this, I want to congratulate Mace for being vindicated. Because for 20 fucking years, he was silenced. People were lobbying shit against him, trying to keep him quiet. All the shit he said came fucking true. And he even got his publishing rights back. So, Mace, we salute you.
Yeah, dude. I mean, wasn't he basically the first big star he had after Big, right? Yep. And he was just basically screwing him the entire time. Like, I would like you actually to detail a little bit about what he said that came true. Because I know the story of their interaction, but maybe that's some of the context I'm missing.
So there's two... well, let's just go back to the beginning. Mace is his first big artist post Biggie, so he can't necessarily try the same fucky shit he tried with his other artists. He'd already reached a level of success and notoriety where he was kind of untouchable in that respect. So Mace never had any of the weird freaky shit, but he did know what was going on. And up until about 3 years ago, when Mace would reference it, he would talk about it in terms of like, I saw things going on there that were against my beliefs, my religion, and I had no part in that, and that is one of the big reasons why I left. But one of the other things that Diddy did was, and this is like some 50 laws of power dumb shit, never outshine the master. So one of Diddy's angles to keeping all the people around him was just making sure that no one ever had that much success. No one could ever outshine him. No one could ever be put into a bargaining position to exit from him. Because on top of all of the alleged stuff, he was just a shit person. He was a dick. He's a dick. And there's plenty of those in the music business. And I don't even have any problem with people who are dicks, especially if they're at least self-aware about it. But the extent at which the spectacle that he portrayed to the masses is so very different than what was actually going on behind the scenes. In Mace's case, again, he escapes a lot of the really horrible stuff and really is just stymied by Diddy from a business perspective. And again, I'm assuming probably because of deals they had or NDAs, he couldn't speak on this stuff, but in the past couple of years, as it's kind of none of that shit matters anymore, he's been like freely speaking about it on his podcast with Cameron, which is great.
I've seen pieces of that interview.
I've loved watching him be able to actually speak this shit. He knew what was going on to the extent that he didn't want any part in it, but he understood how dangerous the stakes were if he just went around saying what was actually going on. Yeah. But dude, there's fucking clips of him going back a long time where he's like, just wait. The house of cards will collapse at some point. And it always does. Like, this is unsustainable. That was unsustainable behavior. And it was just people enabled it or didn't go after it or were scared to, or he was buying people off or people allegedly. But Mace was lucky. He was just smart. He got out when he did. He's done just fine for himself. And now a lot of people that were like giving him shit for a long time, he's completely vindicated.
This was one thing I've wondered about this whole thing since it came out when we were talking about it is, you know, we know now about Mace. We know about all the artists he exploited. We know about all the artists that either had like mental health crises or killed themselves or, you know, wild things happened in their lives after coming across Diddy. Why is it that there's not more people and more artists out here just spilling the fucking beans on this guy? That's the part that I've been a little confused by, is even when people talk about it, there's almost like this reluctance to speak directly about it. Even when the little bit that I've seen of Mace, it still feels like there's parts of it he's talking around. And I guess I wonder, are people still, what are people afraid of, especially now that, you know, he has been locked up?
Well, okay, so there's two things I think here. The first is Diddy had two primary mechanisms for keeping people quiet. The first was a defamation. Like, he would sue them. You can't say that about me. You're alleging things that you can't prove. The next would be intimidation, right? So some people got intimidated. Some people got bought off. Some people stopped being alive, stopped being a problem. And that's scary. That's scary. Like, and a lot of the people around him, even now, like you're saying, well, it's kind of the same thing with the mafia. Like, a lot of the mafia shit in the 80s, all those mob bosses and families getting broken up and imprisoned, that was crazy. That required people to rap. And those people, for a long time, went into witness protection, and we just didn't hear from them. As those old mob bosses started to in jail, and the threat of retaliation decreased, then they would start coming forward. A lot of them have fucking podcasts now. I just watched a thing on Sammy the Bull. He's like a media favorite, and
he's America's sweetheart, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. But 20 years ago, he couldn't have done that, and he probably wouldn't have done that because people that could touch him were still alive. So a lot of the people, the reason why we're not hearing more names explicitly is because Diddy is still alive. He can still, we'll get into this, he can still communicate with the outside world, and he has money. People get for nothing.
Sure. Much
less tens of thousands of dollars. Like, this, the shit is, that's the kind of shit he was on. So in terms of the media is always going to do what the media does. They're only going to repeat what some other official channel said. Because again, if they say something or misrepresent something, libel, and he will sue. He has a couple of like iconic New York defense attorneys that are like their own rabbit holes. We can pull their names up here as we get to that. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. One is Bronfman. No. Bronfman. There we go. Benjamin Brofman. And then the next one is Niglio, Mark, Diddy. Yes. Okay. Cool. We'll get there. But it's money. He's got money and power, and he knows a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that are willing to do whatever for money. And this shit goes back really, really far. So what have you watched? What have you become aware of in terms of like researching? Like, what have you read about in terms of his case and, you know, the current stance of things and like what is alleged?
Right. I mean, of course, like the baby oil shit is the punchline of everything on everything right now. So of course, like we know about the freak offs, we know about the ways that he exploited artists, though some of that isn't new, or some of it is stuff that was known and may not even necessarily be connected to this. But I think more and more of that is coming to light as this happens. Clearly, he was using his influence in the industry to get people to do a lot of crazy and weird and fucked up shit. I've seen interviews of Justin Bieber where he really looks like a POW. Like there's a part of him that looks like something was taken from him. So the problem for me on this one is I have all these little bits and pieces. I'm not sure I see what his kind of like big picture or what his end game was, but there are all of these bits and pieces that just kind of lead you to the conclusion of like, all right, this is kind of one of the sickest people to like be in hip hop music. And as much as we've all enjoyed his work and really admired him through the years, like it also does get to a point where it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, dude, was it like where does this kind of end? You know what I mean?
Prolific.
Yeah.
You know, very few people are at the level of organization with their that he was, but this is like decades of sickness. So here's how I look at these things, and these are topics that I have probably spent more time reading into in conspiracy land, like all of the different triangles and systematic. This is pretty bad. A lot of other people could still be implicated in the course of the investigation of this case for trial. And as we're even seeing now, Jay-Z's name has been pulled in to some of this stuff, which again we'll get to. But when we look at somebody who is this sadistic, this is like this is like psychopath. Now, a lot of psychopaths end up as fucking CEOs. That's like a documented thing, like the personality types that become serial. If they don't become a serial killer, they'll become a CEO. There's like a level of psychosis that you have to operate business at that level, and definitely a disconnection from the emotion, because when you're doing that type of business, someone's getting fucked over. You know, maybe you aren't having people, but somebody's getting fucked over at some point, and you have to be like emotionally disconnected from that to be able to move forward and acquire hundreds of millions of dollars, become a billionaire, that kind of shit, right? This is all like, we're talking about base level psychology. So one of the other things with is statistically, they were probably, and their in life mimics whatever they were experiencing as a kid. So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, what was Diddy's childhood like? Well, how did he get to this point where at least a percentage of his business was people? There's a great documentary, I will share this here, on Hulu called Diddy, The Making of a Bad Boy. It's a great documentary. It gets a lot of the people from the periphery who were unwilling to talk before, now like feeling more confident. They're still not saying a lot of the details. One. That's the Hulu doc, Making of a Bad Boy. And there's a bunch that exist out there, but I find this one to be the most insightful in terms of how does he become like this sinister fuck. So the first thing that we have to talk about is this one guy. Let me find a picture of him. So Diddy's childhood. Diddy, very organized. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. Diddy's dad was a famous New York gangster named Pretty Boy Melvin Combs. Okay. Melvin Combs was, we'll get to that in a second. Melvin Combs he worked with Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas, who everyone will remember from American Gangster.
Fantastic movie.
And he was Frank Lucas's driver. Okay. So at some point,
I don't think I knew that. That's pretty crazy, actually.
That's crazy. That alone is nuts. All right. And for those of you that don't know who Frank Lucas was, he was like one of the biggest drug kingpins in America of the 80s, in New York, imported it from all over the place. And in the movie, they talk about possible, inside job smuggling heroin out of Asia during Vietnam, like American army personnel. It was a major operation.
A true kingpin.
Yeah, it was a major global operation. That's who Frank Lucas is. Nicky Barnes was one of his lieutenants, who, like, Nicky Barnes was more new school in terms of his approach. Frank Lucas was also Bumpy Johnson's driver. Bumpy Johnson was like the previous drug kingpin or mob kingpin of Harlem. But anyways, there was like this new era of gangster that wanted to be public. Nicky Barnes, there was like pictures of him on the cover of magazines. Like, he was not quiet. He was trying to make it seem like he was this legitimate business person. Frank Lucas would always be like, bro, you're bringing way too much attention. In the same way the mob did with Gotti. Big time shit. This huge big time shit, not just New York, huge. At the time, this was huge shit. Diddy's dad works for them, because he sells drugs to an undercover cop. And in order to not get put away, he gives him information. They find out he talked to the police. This is when Diddy is 2 years old. So Diddy only has his mom, Janice. And they have this huge house that their dad built. And Janice didn't want to be alone in this house with Diddy, so she has a friend with a son around Diddy's age move in to the like downstairs apartment. And that guy, Tim, let me see if I can find a picture of him. Try and close these links as we're doing it. Yeah, it's this guy right here. Tim Patterson, I think is his name. But he grew up with Sean Combs. Okay. And there's another hilarious picture of them when they were younger. This is Tim and this is Puff Daddy. And this guy, Tim, thought it was funny. Like, the first time he meets Puff Daddy, who was like 4 years old, he had gold rings on and like bracelets, and like he was already dressed up like this older, playboy kind of guy. But at this point, he gets picked on a lot. He's a tiny little kid. They live in Westchester, so this is just outside of New York City.
Yeah, Yonkers.
Not quite New York City, but still close enough to be New York City. So suburbs. He gets picked on a lot. They don't really go into this in the documentary, but this is where it starts to get fucked. So there's two things that would occur in their house when these guys were kids. And one of them was supposedly Sean Combs' mom, Janice, throwing parties. And the kids weren't included in the parties, but they were in the home and they knew what was going on.
They weren't sheltered from it. Yeah.
So that isn't necessarily well, we can't read any of it,
but he's someone who's coming from an inherently warped context.
Yeah. His dad gets when he's super young. The house he grows up in is just kind of this pretty wild experience for a young kid. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because now Usher and Bieber make sense. He's just reliving what he experienced as a kid.
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyways, there's no real implication of Diddy at this point, but it's just like it's a known thing that they experienced that this Tim guy and Diddy when they were kids. Okay. So that's fucked. So then I'm going to try and keep closing these links as we're going through.
Oh yeah, bro. You're bringing world tab records.
That's ridiculous.
Love that.
When he was a kid, he went to this school, Mount St. Michael Academy. And there isn't really any direct implication of Diddy experiencing this. But at Mount St. Michael Academy, there were cases. And it just so happens that the two people at that school who were responsible for those were there the entire time that Puff Daddy went there. So this is something that, and this also isn't a random thing, okay? Most children in most schools experience some stuff like this. This is not just allocated to this preparatory school in New York. It's not uncommon for children to come across this stuff. But Diddy's got two strange scenarios that he's exposed to as a young kid, potentially, that might give context for why he does what he does later in life. Okay, so he graduates high school. He wants to get involved in the music business. And he is friends with, at this point, through connections somehow, he's friends with Heavy D. Or I guess at this point, yeah, he's in college. He's at Howard. He's making friends with Heavy D and a couple other guys that ultimately go on to found Uptown Records. And this is how he really kind of gets into the music industry. Okay, and at this point, he doesn't really have power, but he knows he has the connections and he gets himself into this group of folks, and Uptown Records starts blowing up. And as the business evolves, before they started giving him real responsibilities there, he kind of makes it a point of his own to become a promoter. And that's when he starts promoting shows and trying to make a name for himself as this producer of good times and cool music, right? So the first event that he throws, hang on one second, Diddy promoter event death. City College, the City College Stampede. 9 people.
Yep. I know all about this.
Okay.
This one's fucking wild.
This was like his first event. Not off to a great start.
No.
So, this is an event that he threw. It was supposed to be like 2,700 people, and I think he and the college end up splitting the liability 50-50, and he settles with people, but doesn't really publicly acknowledge any of his guilt. Says they didn't oversell it, like completely downplays it. He's like, this is a horrible tragedy, but I shouldn't be blamed for it. So that was event number 1, and that was 1991. Now at this point, again, he doesn't really have power in the music business. He's not like a force to be reckoned with. He's really trying to establish himself. And strangely, this thing where 9 people get trampled, this like elevates his status. I don't understand why.
Well, there was also they got
but
like caught behind doors. They got crushed behind doors. I mean, there was people died in like these really brutal, horrific ways, and and like you said, he's not a person of power yet, but clearly at that time he had an understanding of the less I acknowledge it, the less it harms my brand.
Sure. Yeah. The anti-Streisand effect. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's fucked. And worth noting again, because it just goes back to the idea that he's divorced emotionally from anything he's doing. It's all about money. It's all about excelling the ladder and becoming the top of the food chain. And again, like, we've got somebody who was exposed to intense activity, possibly involved in at the school, is bullied, is picked on, and who is developed at a young age kind of a cutthroat mentality for, I'm going to be the top. So, recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyways, Uptown Records is interesting because, let me find the 5 names of the other people involved here. Okay. So Andre Harrell was the actual founder of Uptown Records, but 2 other important people from this story would be the R&B artist and producer Al B. Sure, Puff Daddy, Heavy D, and there's somebody else. And currently, the only 2 people out of that original small group that are still alive are Puff Daddy and Al B. Sure. Now, Al B. Sure had a kid with Kim Porter. They had a whole relationship. And then at some point, Diddy meets Kim Porter and has to have Kim Porter. So they start dating. Kim Porter's also, which again, we'll kind of get into a little more detail. But Al B. Sure, who is heavily referenced in that documentary and interviewed, he is one of the people who has been kind of sounding the alarm for Diddy and experiencing the wrath of Diddy. And there's a point later where he experiences an extreme health issue that like comes on out of nowhere, and he almost, but he is convinced that there's like threats against his life. He's convinced that Kim Porter was, and he's convinced that his dealings with Diddy, that there was a whole lot more shadiness, even beyond what is known. But anyways, he has a kid with Kim Porter. Kim Porter starts dating Diddy, but they remain very close. Al B. Sure says that there are multiple instances where Kim Porter expresses her concern for Al B. Sure's safety. She doesn't want to tell him everything because if Diddy finds out, then he might hurt him. And then Al B. Sure also says that at one point Kim Porter had a diary as the shit got really sinister, as their relationship progressed and as Diddy descends deeper into sadism. And somebody found that and told Diddy, and then lobar pneumonia, really, really kind of randomly. So that's intense. And the Kim Porter thing, that is not new. Like, people have been talking about that for a while. That I remember seeing videos and hearing shit. Even Jaguar, what's her name? Jaguar Wright. Like, she's also been saying that for a while. Like, you need to look into Kim Porter's. That's weird. Look into that situation. But it's really this era from when Uptown Records really starts to explode and Puff Daddy comes in to marry Kim Porter. At this point, he's not that bad. He hasn't really started down the path of darkness, but over the course of his time with Kim Porter, she notices it. She is telling other people that it's like well beyond just, depravity. It's gone well too far. And Al B. Sure, and even, let me find this guy who you may have seen clips of. He's a former bodyguard of Puff Daddy. Gene something, Gene Deal. But he tells a bunch of stories from that era where he's like, you know, Puff Daddy just started to say stuff that was sadistic. Like artists he'd be working with, if they didn't do what he wanted, he'd be like, I'm going to drug them and pimp them out. And he's like, what? Why would you even think that? What the fuck does that mean? And this guy has also been saying this shit for a long time. I remember seeing clips of him going back to the early 2000s Easy. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to hear it, and I'm sure there were PR mechanisms on behalf of Diddy that were trying to keep this guy quiet, because this guy has been saying this shit for forever. I think he stopped working with him in like 99, but he was there for Biggie's. He was there for all like the real sinister shit before the freak off era begins.
Well, and it's all of that period where he's rising to prominence, right? Like that was kind of like a tycoon era. I mean, all of those things were really admired qualities. I think where a lot of us are sort of reassessing how we view those things now. But that was like, I mean, it's literally epitomized in the shiny suit era.
Yeah.
That type of flash and that type of excess was very much admired, both in American and in elements of hip hop culture. And of course that was a part of hip hop at the time that was at odds, was kind of the backpack anti-material against the shiny suit wing of hip hop. But he epitomizes that. And I feel like that time period was the time period that where a lot of people with that type of behavior were uplifted and protected and given immunity from their own shit.
Yeah, it really, I have been looking into these stories for a long time. I've always just understood that what we get presented with is not the reality. So a lot of this stuff doesn't really shock me. Like whenever we find out about a new celebrity being involved with some sinister shit, it just doesn't shock me or surprise me. But it is kind of amazing to me how sensible adult humans in the 90s could witness that and be like, well, he's rich. And it still happens
or
now.
What about mine?
Yeah, sure.
If people know
100%.
that I was here in the room, are they going to start digging around for what I know? So it's like you almost refuse to say anything that you see, because then people will go, well, why were you there?
Yeah.
And then you have to answer to that, whether or not you did anything wrong or not. Just in saying, I saw something at this party, well, what were you doing at that party?
Right. Yeah, 100%. And that's probably another mechanism why more people haven't come forward or said things. Or, dude, Usher, that's a good example. He has said things, but he won't talk about the details.
But that's a tool that guys like that use, right? It's like if you're just in the room for the crazy shit that he's doing, it's almost like a reverse blackmail. It's like Chris Tucker on the plane with Epstein and Bill Clinton.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean? I don't know what he did. He might have done nothing wrong, but just that I see you in that picture, now I have something on you.
Yeah, 100%. And now that all the court cases are. The allegations are now being codified. They're like being put in indictments and stuff. That was part of the mechanism, is blackmail. It's like, you say shit to me, we're releasing the video. If you say shit to me, we're telling everybody what you did. And then, so this, like, we've gotten to the era where it's like, he's got the money, he's got the power, he's an internationally recognized face. He's one of the biggest musical artists globally. In the 90s, like he owns the 90s. He's now become, in many ways, untouchable, and
all the while with very minimal rapping ability.
Yeah,
which is kind of a crazy thing. Like when it's something I almost overlooked as a kid, and then I'll go back and listen to a Puff track that I know I liked, and I'm like, there's really not much here lyrically. Yeah.
Well, again, he was a producer. And
he was a brand. So I'm listening to whatever horrible lyrics he's laying down, but I'm buying into the shiny suit brand. Like there's a part of 10-year-old me that thinks that's really fucking cool. You know what I mean?
We got to get you a shiny suit.
Oh, dude. Oh, my God, dude. We don't. I can't be the one to bring the shiny suit era back.
Yeah, you can.
Dude, that's our next episode in person. Is
shiny suits. Yeah.
Big shiny suits. Both me and you. I love that.
But so this is where like the freak off era begins. The white parties, the house in the Hamptons. He's got a ton of money. He's got a ton of power, ton of notoriety. Then they start doing that shit.
And we're in the mid-90s when this is starting out?
Okay, so in the mid-90s, the real fucky shit with Diddy are the attempts on Tupac and the Biggie.
Yeah.
That's the real...
That's why I'm wondering, because do the freak-off parties at all line up with Biggie and Tupac's death, or is there a before and after?
No, I think... I don't know if we're going to get any revelations from that with relation to the freak off stuff. If, depending on the outcome of the freak off stuff, we might get more cases or investigations reopened into looking into his involvement. But when you look at all of the other people who have succumbed to strange circumstances or their demise around this person and some of the similarities in between them, I mean, at least with like the Biggie and Tupac stuff is, I think those were him trying, he was bullied. And what did he do as he got more money and power? He hired people to fight his battles. So he'd have problems with somebody. He'd think that someone was messing up his cash flow, and he'd be like, go kill that person, including Biggie. You know? The rumor mill there is that Biggie was trying to stop rapping, or at least stop rapping with Puff Daddy, and the Tupac stuff, the same thing. It's just like, he's our biggest competition, and you know, my dad got people, so I'm gonna get people, and that's kind of, in my opinion, that's what he was up to during that area of time. Not necessarily, it was more like gang shit. Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily the sadistic, self-pleasing white party.
It was establishing a genuine power base.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And again, in a time fresh out of the 80s, fresh out of the mob era, like, and this was also the era of rappers that kind of like idolized the mobsters, the gangsters, like that whole thing was popularized by Death Row and what Bad Boy were, and others, but that was just like a cool thing. You wanted to be like the underdog crime boss Gotti, or you know, they kind of they bridged that gap, and I don't know, for me it's just not, they were emulating what they saw. They were emulating, and maybe even in their own
neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, you know? For sure. Dude, his dad, Frank Lucas, like, that was mob shit.
I'm saying even at certain times, you know, if you were in Bensonhurst in the 70s, you could be in a black neighborhood and there was Italian mobsters in the neighborhood. That's just what it was, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because the mob really owned this place. They used to really make things run around here. But again, like, I don't, the definitely, like, the freak off stuff, when you look at the window of time that they're trying to get him on activities, it's from 2004, and they just extended it. It was 2008, but they amended the indictment to be 2004 to 2024. So that's the window of the freak off. This, we may at some point in the future get insight into that. And you know, who knows what other epic portions of hip hop history might be unveiled because of that. But it's like, it's a different era of Diddy. There's him as a kid. There's him in college trying to get established in the music business. There's his come up and domination in the 90s. And then there's the, I've made all the money, now what do I do? And that's when it gets really dark. So
the Ciroc era.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Right. As soon as he gets involved in the alcohol and a couple other like bigger beyond music industry business ventures, he starts to just behave very differently. Now, there's examples through the 90s of him treating women like shit, again, like saying disrespectful stuff, but so far there haven't been any actual firm allegations of, hey, during the 90s he was drugging and people. We might get it though. It really might come out, but in the 2000s it becomes like a fucking industry. So just for people's benefit, I'm gonna pull up a picture, if I can, of the white parties. Right, everyone's seen these pictures, yep. But these are the infamous pre-freak-offs. Everyone was there. Ashton Kutcher, who was suspected to be
with the Kanye glasses.
Yeah, it's such a time, you know. But this was like a coveted thing in the early 2000s. If you got invited to a Diddy white party, it was more significant than getting invited to like the Playboy Mansion or some other dumb comparable thing. Let me here, hang on a second, I have these fucking links pulled up.
That also plays into some of the divide between Frank Lucas and whoever his successor was, right? Normally, if you were doing, or at least in theory, if you were doing something that heinous, you wouldn't want to have a photo op for every one of the people there from beforehand. But it almost became, I mean, I just saw a picture of Al Sharpton on there. It's like, it was like cool to get the all white picture. And maybe not all those people know what happened in part 2 of the night.
Sure.
But it just makes it so that now there's proof that you were there too. So any fucked up shit that goes on here, what were you doing there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, and that's especially with a lot of the A-listers that there's heavy documentation of. That's why they've kind of been quiet, because just the fact that there's a ton of pictures of them on a bed with a bunch of other celebrities, it just doesn't look bad knowing what we know now. And definitely, like, the through line is simple. He had a traumatic childhood. He witnessed intense behavior, and he just got to a point of money and power where he continued to emulate that. So, you know, during that period of time, there's a bunch of people that work from him that are coming out and saying that the shit did happen. And that includes personal, a lot of work, a lot of deviant behavior involving male commercial workers. And it just kind of like ramps up over the years, and ultimately culminating in, you know, Kim Porter's, and then getting with Cassie. And then, of course, we've all seen the video of him beating her up in the hotel. Fucking terrible. But that's where it was. And that was, I'm sure, mild. That's just one thing that got caught on film. In this court case, there's supposedly 9 videos from some freak-off behavior that Cassie was involved in. And again, that's like straight blackmail. How Diddy's defense is already trying to spin that is like, well, they made the video, so it was clearly consensual, even though we know they had, like, you know, bottles of MDMA laced, or it was GHB laced baby oil, and there's like this
that I have not heard.
Okay, so this is, they kind of covered in the documentary, at least is my understanding, but they would have so many bottles that it wasn't baby oil. It was baby oil with GHB. It was laced. And what they would do is they would just spray it on people. And you'd rub in the baby oil to get freaky, but it was laced with GHB. Right? So there's an interesting tangent, and this is like kind of completely unrelated, but not so when you start thinking about it. Jamie Foxx was a frequenter of those parties, and there was this weird scenario where he got sick and was hospitalized. And like apparently some of the symptoms that he was experiencing are like what you'd experience from GHB. And when we start looking into all the other people around him that have met their strange demise, untimely at 50 or whatever, all the guys from Uptown Records, except for Albie Shore, but Albie Shore almost from like very strange circumstance, an illness that came on super randomly. There's even, I've heard even threads pointing it toward the of Brittany Murphy. I don't know how familiar you are with Brittany Murphy's, but she like all of a sudden out of nowhere got pneumonia and she was hanging out with, she was going to the Y parties. She was like in that era of fame and stardom, and she was friends with all the people that were the egregious offenders there. So I don't know. There's a ton of strange shit. The court case, however, is 3 victims. People think one of them is Cassie, and the other two are people who previously filed lawsuits against him. And again, here's where it gets kind of crazy. So there's this whole theory that Cassie filed her lawsuit a long time, I guess like a year or so ago, that he settled immediately just so that law enforcement would have to, like, because today's environment is now much more receptive to seriously taking into account claims. And she knew that by filing that court case, codifying all of her allegations, that the police would have to look into it. Then the video of him assaulting Cassie comes out. He does the apology, and then files, like, the charges get actually filed, and he gets arrested. So there's 2 things. There's 2 things I want to say here first. The first is, in the 90s, his attorney was this guy, Benjamin Brafman. And this guy is a fucking legend in terms of defense attorneys in the city of New York. And he is his own rabbit hole. You could go, I highly recommend anyone who's interested in this topic to look into Benjamin Brafman. He was his attorney during the 90s. He got Puffy off of the gun charges at the club, shot the Shine case. There were a couple other like high profile cases that he was a part of at that time, but he was like the guy. And for scale, Benjamin Brafman has also been Weinstein and Martin Shkreli's attorney. Like big
got the
cases.
all-star lineup over there.
Yeah, no, seriously. He's like, he's a legend in high tier criminal defense in the city of New York. And he's a rabbit hole himself. His attorney now, Mark Agnifilo, is also an interesting character. Let me see if I can find a picture of him. Let's see. Here he is, right? He's a rabbit hole himself. He is the new Bronfman. He is like, his clients are crazy, and the cases that he defends are crazy. In fact, his wife, Karen Agnifilo, she is representing Luigi Mangione.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yes,
they're
married.
They're married. She also used to work for the Manhattan DA's office. She is a legend in her own right. She has her own lore, and if you're into these topics, I would recommend looking into the history of all 3 of those defense attorneys. But the indictment is still evolving. Like, even today, there are updates on this stuff because they just amended the indictment. The original indictment said a lot of stuff about freak-offs. But what it looks like now is that the state is trying to get away from the term freak-off, because in a court of law, you would have to then define what a freak-off is. And if you're only charging him for crimes occurring during freak-offs, it limits your ability to bring in other crimes that he committed that weren't explicitly a part of the freak-offs. So there's been a complete amending of that language throughout the indictment, which is really important because it allows them to be a little more broad in the witnesses they call,
right,
and the actual alleged tangible crimes that they allege occur, and their ability to prove it. The other thing is they extended like I was saying, they extended the window. At first it was supposed to be 2008 to 2024, and now it's 2004 to 2024. 20 fucking years. Just think about that. 20 years this behavior was going on, and really this is the point at which it becomes untenable. This probably was happening at lower scale before that. Even during Making the Band era, some of their was televised. It was documented and televised, like that. And that's
yeah, he was horrific to those people.
That's what he would let the world see. Like, imagine what he was actually
right. He thought,
doing.
This makes me look appealing. This makes me look like a powerful mogul.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm genuinely curious about, I'm wondering what you know about it, is for somebody that, has been getting by in this way for 20, probably more like 30 years, the more we find out.
Yeah.
Was there a final straw or a breaking point, or was this just accumulation and there's been entities in law enforcement that have been looking into him for a long time? Or was there a thing that kind of kicked off like, all right, we got him? Because it was like, before I know it, there's that video where I don't remember where he was, but he's on vacation somewhere that's clearly not America, and he looks super fucking stressed out. Like, what do you know what the leading up to that moment was?
So the lead up to that is Epstein. The lead up to that is R. Kelly. The lead up to that is Cosby. The lead up to that is any other similar individual who has this like decades-long history of sadistic. Because it's being talked about more, because people are coming forward more, we're seeing more of what it is. And the problem with this shit is a lot of it's so interconnected. A lot of these people are connected individuals. They business partners. They party with each other, right? So you start picking away the scabs at one, and you start ripping open like these whole other scabs you didn't think you were going to start opening. But generally, society now has said, okay, if you were a part of some kind of sadistic, not only are we okay with you coming and disclosing it, we're okay with going after regardless of their social status. That's a new thing.
Yep. That
didn't exist in the 90s. It didn't even exist in the early 2000s.
There was definitely less of a class awareness at that time, I think, too.
For sure. And, was that by design? Was that unintentional? There's a whole argument there. But regardless, around 2016, the Me Too era, this shit starts to become a thing. So now it's also too like this is super recently. A lot of states just amended how far you can go back in terms of charging a crime. Like if you committed a crime when you were 10 and you're 30, depending on the crime, they might not be able to charge you for that because it was so long ago. It's like, how do we even reliably affirm that you did this thing? They're different. And again, certain other crimes are different. There's no statute of limitations. They'll just fucking come after you. But for a lot of crimes, there are statute of limitations. But New York, California, a couple other places just amended their statute of limitations and opens the eligibility for people to go after somebody who them 17, 20, 25 years ago, which previously they didn't have. So there's like legal protections that exist now for people to come forward and say, hey, when I was 18, he did this to me. When I was 17, he did this to me.
I also think there's more of a societal thing of like, someone being that successful at a certain time in our lives that almost would have like, well, of course they're not crazy or heinous or, we can't assume that the most successful people are also depraved.
Right.
Like that, or in some way that success makes you immune from depravity.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas I think now we've really flipped that on its fucking head.
Well, and that's, again, from my perspective, that's a fucking good thing. From seeing the things that we've seen, and, I never had to come into, at least doing events, I never had to come into contact with anything close to as sadistic as this shit. But just the shit that we've seen, it would make you look at your favorite artist differently. It would make you look at the industry that supports that type of behavior very, very differently. And stuff at this level, like, again, it's big time criminal cases. You getting treated like shit by somebody in the music industry is one thing. You getting trafficked that's a whole different level of seriousness. And I think it's a great thing. These are uncomfortable conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's necessary though.
It's necessary. You know what we get from having uncomfortable conversations? Maybe a better scenario.
Yeah.
But if we don't talk about it, it just continues like this. Not talking about it is what got it to this point. And again, Epstein, R. Kelly, like Jimmy Savile, like go down the list of people since the 2000s. The illusion of this celebrity being somebody that you would sit down and have dinner with, that's slowly dying finally, and that's why But
it's to some extent, I think, being replaced with influencer shit. You know what I mean? Like, I think, and maybe that's just for people of a certain age, like younger people. But I do think that if their favorite influencer tells them to take this supplement, they take this supplement. If their favorite influencer tells them to eat this fucking thing, they eat this fucking thing. And so I think to some extent, we've transferred some of that energy over to influencers and following. Because they have a following, there's some sort of expertise attached to them.
That 100% exists. A prime example of that would be Rogan or Lex Fridman or any of the big podcasts.
The following is the qualification, not the actual,
not the actual content. And again, I'm not shitting on Joe Rogan or Lex Fridman, but they've come under plenty of scrutiny for that exact reason. Like, they have this huge following and they say these things, and then they're surprised when half a million people behave in a certain way. It's like, well, dude, 500 million people listen to your show. They expect your word to be worth something. That's how we used to justify what
it's
news
like Logan
was
Paul,
best.
the Logan Paul crypto zoo shit. I don't know how much you know about that.
I'm very familiar with that, and
but that's a perfect example. Is people continuing to fall for these like influencer crypto rug pulls?
Yeah.
Because they assume that this popular person that they're personally invested in is credible. And that's insane to me.
Well, but we also, like, one of the unique ways that society has evolved to combat that is canceling. Like, think what you want to think about cancel culture, but there's enough shit online now to where if people catch enough, it's the same thing with a court. They don't need actual evidence to put you in jail. They just need to be able to have enough evidence to convince a jury to put you in jail.
Right.
That's how this shit works. Like, innocent people go to jail because there's enough circumstantial evidence to convince a jury. It's the same thing with society and cancel culture. Exact same fucking thing. There's enough circumstantial evidence to say this person is this one way, and you've been deplatformed. Like, that's the one that used to didn't happen. Like, even if shit would, like, make it to the fucking news, sinister stuff. R. Kelly, they're making jokes about him pissing on people in early 2000s.
Yeah.
That wasn't like a unknown thing. But the mechanism for canceling R. Kelly didn't exist. That's a relatively new thing that's come since 2016. That since then, shit has evolved into.
And now I think it's sort of re-evolving the other direction, where
the pendulum swings. Yeah,
the pendulum is swinging that other way now, where it's actually quite helpful to be reactionary and abrasive and hateful and all these other things, because Twitter is a open space and a welcoming space to you now.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of that swing back going the other way, where the internet's going to be like it was in the early 2000s, where it's literally just like neckbeard Nazis.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's where it's headed.
Yeah, but it could already be there, like sometimes that I'm scrolling on Twitter or X and I'm like, oh God, how did this make it on here?
I never had Twitter, and I've watched obviously culturally how it's evolved, and I know like anybody that I know that stopped using Twitter for a period of time or whatever, they talk about it like they quit heroin. They're like, yeah, I really had to put Twitter down, you know, it was like so fucking up my sleep. And like people would talk about Twitter in a way that like, I don't have that relationship with MySpace. Yeah. So I can't relate, but it is more and more, I think, just becoming a safe haven for you to say the craziest shit you want. I feel like a lot of people have conflated cancel culture with, I want to be in a world free of negative feedback.
Yeah. Yeah.
Canceling me is any negative feedback.
Yeah.
Or any resistance. And
100% right.
And those two things are not the same thing.
They aren't. They are. Like, again, idealistically, I love when serial get canceled. I love that.
Right. It's great.
I don't lose any fucking sleep over any of those people going to jail. I'm not going to. And it's like the PR to, there's a reason that they don't want that mechanism to exist or to continue, because there's the fear that where does it stop? Then it's like everything is analyzed, and at some point everyone has done or said something that is regrettable or is cancelable by whoever's standards. But again, idealistically, R. Kelly needs to be in jail. Puff Daddy needs to be in jail. That's spanning decades, commercialized, sadistic shit. Not, bro, you want to pay for, be my guest. You want to engage in strange consensual behavior with other adults, consenting adults? Go right ahead. I'm not going to judge you. I don't care.
Couldn't give less of a fuck.
Could not give a shit about what you're doing in your bedroom. I do not care. But once you're like drugging and taking advantage of people, then I have a problem. Once you're sadistically and methodically creating an infrastructure for you to en masse, I don't know. I don't have any mercy for you. You made your own fucking bed, and you probably belong in jail. That's abhorrent behavior when we look at the general sampling of society. And part of a reason that he got away with it for so long is just money and power. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's kind of multiple pendulum swings happening at one time. Maybe that's sort of the paradox of where we are, right? Because we are still getting the aftermath of Epstein and Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and everyone we talked about with Puffy, right? We're finally getting some level of accountability to powerful people, that power. But then you have the flip side of that. It's like, I'm trying to figure out the right way to articulate this. On one hand, there was a piece of the internet and a time period in our culture where the cancel culture, the nitpicking to at what people say or their views or whatever, to sort of exclude them. Now it's gone the other way, where it's like Elon Musk is sea-hiling at the inauguration.
Yeah, right.
And people are like, what are you, sensitive? Don't cancel me, bro. And it's like, dude, do you think everyone has to like your shit? Like, I don't get what that take is, where it's like, if anyone says anything, it's like become this safe space now for people who are complaining about safe spaces. You know what I mean?
Well, everyone's a fan of free speech until they hear something they don't like.
Right.
That's ultimately where we're at right now. The same people, you're completely right. The same people that are like, oh, I want the freedom of speech. Those are the first fucking people to cry about their hurt feelings.
Yeah.
And it's like, we can't have it both ways. I, being a person of reason, understand that if I want to live in a society with something like free speech, I'm going to hear shit I don't like.
Right.
I'm going to hear shit I hate. That's
Gotta
the
get
point.
used to it.
That's the point. That's the point. That was the whole purpose, idealistically, of giving us free speech. And, I don't have to agree with anyone. I don't have to sit down with anyone for dinner. I don't have to engage with anything I don't want to engage. But, I have to hear some shit I don't like. I don't know. That watching the crybabies, especially on X, watching the crybabies do that hypocritic hypocritical back and forth, that just, and again, like, we're not just talking about conservative people here. I know plenty of liberal folks
100%
who talk about freedom of speech, and then as soon as they hear some shit they don't like, they're like, we should hang those people.
Sure.
We should put them in a fucking prison camp. It's like, dude, that's just as bad.
No,
So.
it's definitely just like a part of who we are.
Yeah.
It's a punitive culture anyway.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And yes, everyone likes to point out what everyone else is doing wrong. No one wants to point the fucking finger back at themselves and be like, well, here's how I'm contributing to that. And, but that also being said, I think by and large, a lot of people just get stuck in their echo chamber and they regurgitate whatever they're being subjected to on a daily basis. And that still shouldn't, like, dude, we hear about some of these big names, the only ones.
Right.
Diddy, Epstein, Weinstein, R. Kelly, they're just the ones that it finally, like, broke the camel's back somewhere.
And a lot of times, especially with anyone like that, even if it's like a religious or a cult leader, just someone in a prominent position, a lot of times it falls apart because they lose control of their own ego and the scam falls apart.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that happens to a lot of these guys. I don't know if that's ultimately what happened to Puff, but it's entirely possible.
I think really what happened with him is he got sloppy. This is what happens. Everyone gets sloppy. He started thinking, like every fucking criminal before him, I'm not going to get caught. I'm untouchable. They all start thinking this way.
And everything in your life is actually reaffirming that you're untouchable.
Kind of, because for a long time, yeah.
Because you have these massive parties where you're doing heinous shit and but you're getting photographs of every famous person in the country, you know.
Well, and it's not going to surprise me if we can find some like actual direct links, donating to political campaigns, donating to, you know, political organizations throughout.
Vote or die.
Yeah, 100%.
Vote or die.
100%. He was, you know, an iconic person in the night. For those who are not familiar, Puffy ran a campaign in the 90s. He was the face of this campaign called Voter to get the MTV generation of kids to register to vote and vote. But big players, like big time shit. He's one of the wealthiest men in hip hop. Which also I want to make sure we talk about this too, which is definitely related to it. And it's going to involve another name, another real big name in hip hop that people have been saying things about for a long time, but nobody really wanted to listen. And that name is allegedly Jay-Z.
Yeah.
Now, we had talked about this briefly on the last one because it was just a little seedling, but since then there's been a couple developments, and I saw this coming. This is what I was talking before about how it's all too interconnected, right? You start pulling threads in one and you end up pulling threads in another because it's just all interconnected. So for those that are not aware, a woman came forward saying she was assaulted by Sean Combs and Jay-Z when she was 13 years old. And as of the 27th of December, the judge said that they are still allowed to remain anonymous. And, you know, this is from the other day, or I guess maybe earlier this month. He's trying to get it dismissed. But this occurred in 2000 at an after party somewhere. So this is what I was kind of talking about before, where not only are we starting to see connections to other enterprises, but we're also seeing an expanding of the window to get closer to the 90s. And what might happen, just like with Epstein, we're not done with that. Like, there's still more that will eventually come from that, I'm sure. That story isn't just completely done. As time goes on, same thing, I'm sure, with Weinstein and probably with R. Kelly. But the scope will expand, and at some point, 10 years, maybe 5-10 years, they're probably going to be talking about the stuff that occurred in the 90s that can be proven, and depending on whether depending on what the crime is, the statute of limitations might not apply. So the case that this girl is making from 2000 when she was 13, that I'm sure exists because the statute of limitations was opened up to go that far back.
Sure.
There is no statute of limitations typically. So all the Biggie, Tupac stuff like that is still on the table. And there's that to me is what interests me the most. Was he doing some sadistic shit? Yeah, they were joking about it and fucking Get Him to the Creek. People were talking about this for a long time. When we started doing events, it was explicitly told to me by a very knowledgeable individual in this field to not work Diddy parties. This is not new shit. The stuff that really is most interesting to me is what are we going to find out about the mysteries of hip hop? And dude, it couldn't, like, there's Biggie and Tupac are some of the big names. There are so many names, legends of Harlem hip hop that met strange
Big L.
that were attributed to this or that, but we might get a little more insight.
And if you keep them, clouded in mystery, we can never point the finger directly at Puff or whoever is accountable. I'm not saying it's him, but of course there is just sort of this wealth of like mysterious deaths right around him and in his heyday.
Yeah. In the place that he said he was the king of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was his mentality then. And was he women? Yeah, for sure. That was also just like there's a larger conversation to be had about that in hip hop. And NWA, those guys were hurting women then too. That era was just pretty dark, but it wasn't anywhere near as dark as it gets in terms of Diddy's story. Now, I've also heard stuff, allegedly, because of the known history of shit relating to West Coast rappers, that there might be some big names from the West Coast that get involved in some kind of like sadistic, not necessarily as organized as Diddy, but then that might open up territories into, again, legendary cases from the 90s relating to 90s hip-hop artists and businessmen connected to them, that we might, over time, enough of the people who were orchestrating the or get imprisoned, the more comfortable people become talking about it. Like the Diddy shit, here's the real reason more people aren't coming forward. He hasn't been found guilty. If they find him guilty, there's going to be a fucking flood of people making accusations and filing lawsuits against him that will make what's going on now look hilariously
right. That's what really opens the floodgates.
Yeah. Because once it has been proven in a court of law that he is guilty of those crimes, that it was the same shit with the Epstein stuff. Like if that case there were some cases that and not exactly the same with Epstein, but there were precedents that some of the victims couldn't go after him until officially recognized by courts he did something wrong. So I'll be sure there's a lot of what he talks about in the documentary. He doesn't go into detail. There's portions that he won't even speak on because there's open litigation about it right now. It can jeopardize the case. It can get him criminally involved as somebody who's like divulging information he shouldn't be at this time. But that all, like the trial, it going to trial, and if he gets found guilty, that then shit is going to get really weird. That's when everyone is going to feel comfortable coming out and saying what they have to say. Because right now, all of this is alleged. Regardless of how much circumstantial evidence exists, regardless of how many people said they saw it, regardless of how much has been said about him since this shit went down, it's all alleged. He hasn't been criminally found responsible. But he gets found criminally responsible. There's a ton of people that signed NDAs that are no longer bound to the NDA. Right? So there's a lot of people that could be saying things right now, but they've signed paperwork, and he will sue them if they say anything.
Right. Even with his back against the ropes, he's very much capable of doing that.
He still can use that over them until he is found guilty. Once he is found guilty, that flips the script, and a lot of especially if the NDA was made to cover up illegal activity, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And those people can file a lawsuit, go on TV and talk about it. Like, we haven't got the Surviving R. Kelly for Diddy yet. There's documentaries. There's a couple good analyses of the case so far, but we're not at that point because he hasn't been found guilty yet.
Right. There isn't systemic recognition yet.
Yeah. Like official paperwork.
Yeah.
Here are specific crimes that occurred on specific days that he is guilty of.
So what, I know you mentioned some of it earlier, but what were the specific things that were the things he was arrested for? What is he being accused of criminally? Because we know sort of like, we know about, not giving people access to their publishing. We know all of just the business shit he did. Then we know about some of the alleged stuff that he did. But what is he really looking at now in a cell?
It's RICO.
Yeah.
He's in charge of a criminal enterprise that was illegally trafficking people for stuff. And that includes hiring male prostitutes, commercial workers is how they're referred to in the indictment. But then also violent acts of against there are three specific victims. Again, one of them people think is Cassie, and then the other two were previously women who filed cases against him but settled. Like they reached a settlement and dropped the case. So those people allege that they were involved in deviant behavior. One of the victims said she was dangled out of a hotel window after he like groped her or something. But it's and there's even I don't know if this person, I think she filed a separate case because there's already a sea of cases filed against him. But the big one is the state's case. Those are all civil cases, individuals suing him. The state case is the one that could like put him in federal, pound me in the ass prison for probably forever. At least long enough to not enjoy the rest of your life. So those are the three victims. And again, it's the other women who have filed cases, though, that's not light reading. Like one woman alleges he violated her with a TV remote in like some, again, freak off scenario. But it goes into why they were trying to reframe the wording in the indictment to not just be specifically freak off. Because what they found in the course of their investigation is that he was just, yes, the freak offs were there, but he was people in other ways. And if we say that, if we have in the indictment that this was all in relation to freak offs, there's a ton of stuff we can't go after him for. But it's dark. It's like really like reading the indictment is very dark, and that's just the shit that they know for sure they can prove, or they think they can prove. That's not everything. There's tons of stuff that occurred that they can't prove in a court of law that didn't make it into the indictment.
I've always wondered this over the years, and I'm curious what your take is. But as time has gone on, like you start seeing rappers from our childhood era that you always perceived one way, and they're doing commercials for like the corniest shit, and they're cozying up to people in power that you couldn't have imagined that like fuck the system artist would do. And as time goes by and we start to see, well, okay, now we know what's going on with Puffy, and then Jay-Z's name gets thrown in the mix and this and that. Is it that like that thing you were talking about, like being as public as you can so that you have as many backers as possible when your shit gets back to you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I've always, my default was always like, sell out. Like they just couldn't say no to the check. But really it's about,
I need a cover.
Gathering favor.
Yeah, I need a cover. I need shit on other people. I need a cover. Because I know what I'm doing is fucked. And I know if the average person knew about what I was doing, they'd burn me in the fucking street.
Or that it's in some way advantageous to me to cozy up to this person that, it is kind of the opposite of everything that I've, as an artist, have
railed against,
represented. Yeah.
I mean,
Wild.
100%. And like these clubs exist. Like, how many more of these types of clubs of behavior are we going to have to unearth before people are like, oh fuck, maybe what I think it is isn't.
Right.
Maybe this illusion that they're selling me on my TV or via music, maybe it's just that. Maybe it's an illusion. Again, we have the benefit of a life behind the stage. We know it's an illusion. And again, like, I've had my bad experiences doing that shit. Fortunately, I never got roped in. I've had some like really fucked up scenarios. I've had some really fucked up scenarios that I've had to be a part of, but nothing like that. It's not hard for me to see the real dark shit happening. Just from what I saw, that was like public behavior.
Right.
What are they doing in private? What are they doing in the place where there isn't, 1,000 staff around, or the staff is bound by NDAs in strange ways? I don't know. For me, none of this shit seems crazy, because the shit I have seen behind stage is like, that's pretty crazy to the normal person. If they heard about it, they'd be like, what?
Mm-hmm.
You were that close to that?
Yeah. I mean, even just like Astro World is a perfect example.
Prime example, yeah.
You know what I mean? That's they were more than happy and comfortable to throw that type of event with no real safety precautions, no real security infrastructure at all. Like, you and I both know multiple people that worked there that watched it just be kind of out of control from the jump. And again, this is what they're comfortable showing you in public.
Right.
Yeah,
imagine what they're going to lengths to keep private.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just a weird scenario, dude. It's a really weird scenario. And I really, the silver lining for all this shit for me is like, yes, I hope all the people who suffered get some retribution. I just really hope that the threads keep getting pulled and we get some answers to. There are people that know things that are still alive, and if he gets found guilty and they start opening up an even further scope of what they're willing to go after him for, like, we might get some answers to some of the...
and that's kind of untangles a lot of the issues with the music industry as a whole. And I hear certain people will say, like, the music industry isn't what it used to be, but the music industry as it was this.
Yeah, right,
so
exactly.
I think it's about time we pull this apart and fucking burn it down and do it better.
100%. That's a great point, and I could not fucking agree with that.
We don't have to build the music industry, the entertainment industry, right, exclusively off of exploitation. And
right,
there's definitely a better way.
Maybe this is the sign that we should, if the system that existed is collapsing, is unsustainable, maybe that's the sign that we should try and do something different. And part of that is calling out now. Here's the really fucking dark part about this. Diddy, again, he's not the only one. He's just the one that got caught right now.
Mm-hmm.
There are some bigger players above him. Clive Davis's name has been kind of looped into this. Quincy Jones's name has been looped into this. And that's, again, not unique. But what the point I'm bringing that up is, like, there's a whole class of people in the entertainment industry that exist above the face, the person on the stage.
Yeah, the investor class.
Right? Yeah, no, exactly. And there's a few names that are very big that are implicated in not only this behavior, but debatably worse behavior. Their own little system of that is bigger in every way than what Diddy is doing, and what fucking, like, for me, it's like, how the fuck did it even get like this? Like, at what point? This is not something they made up. It's learned behavior. And I mean, when you look into the history of Hollywood, it becomes real clear that used to just be a prostitution ring.
Yeah.
It was a way for old guys to fuck the freshest skin. That's all it was. And that's why the entertainment business is like that, because that's how it started. It always was that. And it was just sold to us as something different. So, I agree with your point. Why would we want to continue to prop that up? The more we learn about it, like, dude, you want to hear some fucked up shit? Listen to how like the young female movie stars were treated. Shit, it's always been like this, and they just got more clever at hiding it. And Diddy is debatably a small fish in a much bigger pond with much bigger fish. So that to me is like, once you start extrapolating, like you look at all the Diddy stuff, but then you zoom out and you just know he's not the only one. Clearly, there's already like evidence to prove that he's not the only one. I don't know, man. It's just again, this is the problem with, I guess, mass appeal, or this is why I prefer a niche. And it's like the art that I consume. This is why I prefer a niche, because the masses don't exercise the best judgment. I know this, if somebody in a band, in a scene, gets called out, like it's confirmed that they're into some fucky shit, that scene will destroy it. That band will have no more power. Once you give it away to the masses, though, the masses will like happily, delightfully ignore reality because the shiny fucking thing on the screen. I don't know.
Well, listen, this is a very much an evolving story. I'm sure this is something we'll be talking about for years to come now.
Oh, for sure.
And at least at a minimum, it's like the beginning of the end. And I mean that in a positive way. It's the hopefully, it's the beginning of the end of a certain way of doing things.
Yeah.
That we can kind of move on from, at least in entertainment.
Well, that's a beautiful way of putting it, and probably the best
hyper
way.
Optimistic.
Yeah. Well, but, dude, like that's what I mean to say by it's important. I would much rather the times that we're in now, where these things are getting talked about, to whatever it was in the early 2000s. Like, sure. I prefer it. I don't think we should be propping up people who do fucky shit. I think being respected by society comes with a fucking weight of behaving respectably. Sorry, that's just my opinion. And we keep propping people up that behave this way, and society will behave that way. We're just going to respond to what input is put into it. So, I like that way of looking. That is a great, like, down the road golden vision of what this means, is that the collapse is beginning. So it's the end of this era.
It's the same thing when we were talking about
a new one.
It's when we were talking about because the last episode we did, I believe, was about the Dan Schneider series.
Yep.
And everything that happened at Nickelodeon and some of those child it's all in the same genre, in the same time period.
100%.
And I'm more than happy to light a match to all of it, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's my biggest hope, is that more and more people continue to become okay with that.
Yeah.
There is like this silly element of people our age who are like, I don't want to destroy my childhood. Fuck you. Our childhood was weird. If you're looking to this to justify your childhood being good, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
It wasn't good because that's what we were being given.
And you can still think Drake and Josh was funny when you were 12. It doesn't change that, right?
But we got to be okay with your idols.
Yeah.
Like, literally, your idols. Burn the shit that doesn't fit. So, I don't know. This was a really positive and cheery podcast. I'm glad.
Wild, bro. We went deep.
But dude, thank you for coming on here and going around this. Like, I think I might have just convinced Matt Pepino to do a podcast, but I always love having. Man. That's what I'm saying. I really love having people who have the perspective of the literally behind the scenes shit. I feel like it's a useful perspective.
Well, dude, let's just keep it a buck, right? You and I have had many, I would say, off-air conversations about things we've seen that we'd like to say on one of these cameras, and we're not sure how to do it. And so this is, I'm asking why people are afraid to talk, and then I'm looking at my own situation like, well,
Right.
I got some stories about some fucking people that would be pretty crazy, and not knowing, how delicately to treat that and how to walk that line, and this Puff story, it's like the most egregious, like blatant example of this type of thing. But like us and everyone we worked with has had some micro version of that in their life that they're like, all right, I just have to keep going.
Well, but here, like this is also like from the perspective of respecting somebody who experienced something traumatic. You got to give that person has to want to talk about it. You can't force that to come out. And, I know at some point, you're right. We have had many offline conversations about this, and at some point in the future, the opportunity will be right for it. But, I hope for I love the collapse. The collapse, because the collapse means we can start something new. Nothing happens until the collapse has at least begun.
Right. We don't move on until that. Yeah.
So, the moment will present itself, and at that moment, we will literally start a podcast.
Yeah.
And go through the list of people who have had strange shit. And again, like, I was pretty fortunate. I didn't have too many really sick situations that I was even subjected to, like, on the outside, like, that I had to be there for. But, the
vast majority of mine are just extremely strange, or it just inappropriate, or just shitty, or just like, wow, what a fucking dickhead. Imagine if it was like, oh, I just saw my favorite rapper fuck a kid, like it is crazy.
Well, and there was something that I was thinking when I was watching that documentary, because Puffy started as a runner. He was an assistant.
Yeah.
Right. And there was like this weird math in my brain that's like, wow, he was a runner, and probably that there was another area where maybe he was, before he had established himself, like he got taken advantage of, and the counter swing to him, his experiences there are the culmination of which is like making the band. Like he was just making them suffer through whatever they made him suffer through, like the rite of passage, weird shit. And I'm just really glad that most of the people that we know never had situations like that. And most of the people that we know in event production, they became better because of a shitty situation. Like I know me personally, there are some things, some ways I got treated and situations I found myself in that I left that event and I was like, I'm never doing that. I'm never working that kind of event. I'm never working with that person. Or if I'm in that position, I would never do that to that person.
Yeah.
I'm going to make it a point that no one is going to have to suffer like I just had to fucking suffer.
Yeah.
So yeah. And that again, I think that's a mentality thing. That's a generational thing. And, at some point there will be a window where we'll need to just start a show and get all the people to talk about those things.
Yeah, it's coming.
I can taste it. We just planted the seeds. But dude, Dakota, thank you for joining again. This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. I want to give you a second to give your shout outs again, and I of course will leave the links in the description of this video, ITR Boxing, OF, the OF page and stuff. But go ahead, give the shout outs.
Bro, TLB, one of my fave pods in the game. Happy I get to be a recurring guest. Check out the Slip and Weave podcast. Check out ITR Boxing. Check out the Lukey Boxing Show. And very soon, in potentially in the next month or so, episode 3 of The Fight Life with Shadeja Green.
Fuck yeah, dude. Hell yeah, man. This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you folks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. See y'all.
My man.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.